Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema. Exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from the science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. Crowley considered Friedrich Nietzsche a prophet and forerunner of Thelema, and Nietzsche looms large at a critical point of transition for Western philosophy. We'll dive into a chapter from his book, Beyond Good and Evil, that lays out the evolution of Western philosophy up to his day and beyond.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Hey, it's season 4.
No, it's season 5.
Season 5.
You were mistaken, my friend.
Now
you're correct.
What's the old saying? Season 4, shame on me. Season 5, shame on you.
I think there's like some kind of Nightmare on Elm Street reference going on there, but
Toronto Thelema's new nightmare.
Yeah, so we'll all be dream warriors today, and we'll delve into the beyond.
Oh, man.
Beyond good and evil.
Sorry, our FX budget tanked for season 5.
That is the sound of the beyond. It sounds a little bit like an old refrigerator.
Yeah, it's car engine turning over. Or refrigerator
really
engine
hard.
turning over.
Yeah.
We got on the table next to me a copy of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. And this is our stand-in for... my favorite book by Nietzsche is The Genealogy of Morals. Mm-hmm. And that's about 125 pages long. It's pretty succinct. But then we discovered there's a chapter in here, remembered there's a chapter in here called On the Natural History of Morals, which is only 20% as long as that. So I thought maybe we could start with that and see if we could get most of the material on the table very efficiently, because in 4+ years, and we keep making side references to Nietzsche, it's nice to formalize something so we actually have a section of it in the bank, and so that we can more legitimately reference when we're reading other things. And there's stuff in here that is either Crowley adjacent or Crowley in forming, for sure. I noticed stuff about like a significant amount of stuff about how freedom exists in structure rather than in. There's a whole chapter on. Yeah. I can't remember what he calls it because he uses a French term, but in the translation is like letting go or let go. There are things in here that are helpful to have more than one person talking about the same subjects, and then there's stuff in here that just is different than anything Crowley gives us, but explains his perspective maybe on like why he's so hostile to say like, prescriptive morality or sort of his hostile position against Christianity. There's stuff in here that talks from Nietzsche's perspective about what he calls slave morality or herd morality, and why that's damaging to the natural instincts of the individual. So that's so it's a good piece of writing to do for us. What do you think? Anything you can pull out just off the top of your head?
Yeah, so it's pretty much as the history of morals. I think it's most succinctly thinking of it in terms of Plato as a starting point. It is kind of like envisioning morals as an evolving sort of sphere, to the point where in Nietzsche's day there was the field of the science of morality, or the moral sciences, and so which he's kind of cynical about. the idea, particularly because of the fact that it sort of takes morals for granted rather than exploring what morals are or whether or not they actually stand the test of experimentation and whatnot. He also makes the important point that morals rely on context. So if you're like just in this European context, then you're going to take it for granted probably that you have morals are just everybody knows what falls under the category of morals and what's appropriate in terms of morals. Whereas if you're looking outside of your own sphere, you can discover that they really are relative to the context. So going into totally different spheres. A good example of that is just basic. If you have Christian morality in a Christian world with nobody that's non-Christian involved versus the same kind of circumstances in a Muslim world or in a Hindu world or a Buddhist world or something like that, you're going to have very different contextualization for morality.
Yeah, I think he's a little bit sympathetic, although by his own report, he says there's not a positive word in the whole book. This is an entirely negative work, at least according to the preface writer's writing about Nietzsche's own opinion of his own work. Nietzsche saw this as a wholly negative, kind of polemical attack. But I think there is a little bit of sympathy in here because for Nietzsche, morality is so monolithic across all of Europe and then across all of the cultures that have been subjugated to European influence. He feels it's difficult to see beyond this monocultural idea of what the good actually means. And so for him, what's really needed is a survey of the materials on the ground to look back through history and across cultures and see the different moral systems that are in place and just collect and catalog those. And so he thinks philosophers for the last 2,000 years or more, 2,500 years, have been sort of jumping the gun and looking for what he calls I don't know what he calls it, but like looking for like the foundational principle of morality without allowing it to upset the surface level facts of what things we think are good and what things we think are bad. He's sort of doing the last step first and then trying not to disrupt.
Yeah, he
what's
uses
on
the
surface.
example of the bad man does bad because he does not know it is bad and it is going to be bad for him. If he knew that it was bad, he wouldn't do it, which is an incredibly naive. I mean, it's like kind of a simplification probably, but it is kind of like establishing that that's kind of the mentality that people have.
Yeah, so this is in Plato. And it's in the mouth of Socrates. I don't know what dialogue because Nietzsche doesn't reference it, but I've seen this idea before, right? And so it's supposedly Socrates' idea that if bad things are bad for me, then whatever is bad for the community is also bad for me. And so if I go out and do bad things in the community, then that's disruptive. And surely there'll be some trickle down, like I'll get caught by the avalanche of bad things that I've started. You know, if I go out and start committing fraud, for example, and blow up the whole financial system, it doesn't matter how much money I've accumulated if the whole currency is so radically devalued by the fact that people like me are out there committing fraud all the time. So for Plato come Socrates, it becomes the case that no one can do evil things except by error, because wanting good things for ourselves, we would then also want good things for the community. So anything that we do that isn't good, we do just because we misunderstand what the good is. And
which is a nice way to make the rational mind feel good that it's figured it out.
It's a good reason to go and wonder what is good, right? Because to start it, but for Nietzsche, I think Socrates is like a person who likes upsetting people. He's out there being really confrontational. He's standing in the marketplace, half naked or whatever, and then just going up to whenever he sees like an important general or a senator or a society figure or another more philosophical teacher, he'll just go and confront them about arbitrary questions and ruin their entire afternoon. And then the motto of Socrates, right? True wisdom exists in knowing that one knows nothing. I think for Nietzsche, this can't possibly actually be Socrates' position, and he uses some Greek phrase that means like, to the chimera of Socrates add Plato.
The phrase uses basically in Greek, but it pretty much gives like in front Plato, behind Plato, and in the middle chimera or monster.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just basically Plato packaging this sandwich of Platonism.
Yeah, and he thinks Plato is like deferring to an authority that doesn't exist, just like putting these words in Socrates' mouth to justify his own position or something. And he's got a couple of philosophers. Schopenhauer he'll attack in the same way, or not in the same way, but for similar reasons. Schopenhauer here, he says, we were not going to do this first, but let's do it now since we're talking about it. Schopenhauer, he says, the fundamental principle, again, it's Latin, but it's in English, it's something like harm none, matter of fact, help all as much as you can, or something like this. And Schopenhauer is a philosophical pessimist. He doesn't think life is worth living. He becomes a Buddhist. I've read things into the record before where Nietzsche complains about Schopenhauer trying to found a new European Buddhism. The thing he likes about Buddhism maybe is this idea that life is suffering.
Yeah, and it's an attempt to escape suffering.
Schopenhauer is also where Nietzsche gets idea that the world is will. I don't know if Schopenhauer says will to power, but for Schopenhauer...
that's Nietzsche's innovation.
Nietzsche, but for Schopenhauer, the fundamental grounds of existence, the ontology, is this striving, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really weird for a Buddhist and a pessimist who believes the world is striving to then say you should go spend as much of your time as possible helping people. Like maybe if the world is very, very difficult and many people are in a condition of suffering, then you would then want to help lift up your friends and neighbors, so at least the people in your immediate sphere were living a slightly more pleasant life. But if you actually don't believe a pleasant life is possible, if you think the cause of suffering is attachment and every good thing that happens to you is just an opportunity for you to lose that good thing and experience more suffering, it's not going around and helping people have good experiences that they will one day miss is not necessarily the most positive Buddhistic approach, right? So he says even with Schopenhauer's a pretty interesting pessimistic worldview, how could he still have this really boring moral principle? Like his metaphysics aren't connecting to his moral philosophy. And he's going to phrase it, even Schopenhauer played the flute. Read his biographers on this point. Every day after dinner, he played the flute. And like, if you really think the cause of suffering is attachment, how can you attach yourself to the pleasure of playing this flute? It's like, is someone really a pessimist if they're a Buddhist and they play the flute and they affirm harm no one philosophy?
And implicit in this idea of like daily playing the flute at the same time in a regimented fashion is like implying that there's a working towards something or something along those lines as well.
Very good. Yeah, that's true, because he taught it's not, because this connects to what he'll say later in the chapter about letting go, right? It's not about letting go. It's about observing structure and pursuing something within the context of that.
On that note, it's kind of like I feel like if this is a diatribe against everything in the sense of it being like a very pessimistic or negative kind of work, I forget the term that you actually used in terms of Nietzsche's feeling about this book. I think what he's doing is being critical about the dichotomy or the duality of good and evil. And that being what blinds us to things. So that's what I've always taken it as, which is when you so if you have, for instance, the idea of rigid discipline, and then on the other side, complete freedom, just taking one or the other is the problem. You have an oscillation. You have a sort of dynamic combination of those two concepts. He uses the example of like the artist, as we've just touched on there, and the artist puts disciplined work into their art, gradually honing their skills so that in my estimation, what happens is then they can let the freedom happen. They can let loose with that creative freedom, and it goes down rigid guidelines like canals, water going down canals that have been pre-constructed for a purpose to channel that water, so that you have a combination of the two forces instead. And it almost feels like that's really what life is in the first place, you know?
So the criticism of Socrates is that it's not even Socrates' position; it's that it's Plato's position, and he's just trying to use an appeal to authority to shoehorn in something that he thinks. The criticism of Schopenhauer is that his sort of like just be nice to people doesn't fit with his, slightly more interesting metaphysical worldview. There's also a critique of Kant in here. He talks about how the categorical imperative is not particularly categorical and doesn't provide us an imperative. Do you know what it is, the categorical imperative? I've talked about it before, but I didn't know what it was called. So the categorical imperative is the idea that when we're faced with moral questions, we organize them by category and see if we can find one sort of direction to go in based on the sort of feeling that this gives us as a category. So, for example, is it right to steal food to feed a starving child? You've got two conflicting moral principles here. Like, is it right to feed children? Is it right to steal? And so this is like an unhelpful limit case, right?
Yeah.
So this is the most radical example you can think of. That's why it's interesting. That's why people keep bringing it up. It makes it feel like stealing is appropriate. So from that, we can kind of gather that maybe in all other cases, stealing is not appropriate. So we have this category of theft. And we can say the imperative is do not steal. And the complicating factor is this idea of feeding children. Well, so now we have another category of feeding children. Is it appropriate to feed children? Well, not in all cases. What if the child is not hungry? What if the only food available is poisonous? What if it's not your fucking kid and it's none of your goddamn business? Like, so it's not always appropriate to feed children. So this can't be a moral imperative, you know? So even though it would be appropriate to feed this starving child, we have this imperative of non-stealing that seems to hold up because in every case, non-stealing is appropriate. So we can say that, like, no matter what, stealing is always wrong, no matter what, in the face of kind of what circumstances. And another, this is an anachronistic example, but another thing people talk about is like, well, what if you're lying to a Nazi about the fact that you're hiding Jews in your basement? You know, for Kant, lying is one of these categorical imperatives. It's like you think of all in this instance, it feels complicated, but if you look at an aggregate of all the incidences of lying, you can say no, lying's never appropriate. You know? And so, again, unhelpful limit case, like obviously it's appropriate to lie in this case, but Kant wants to come up with some objective moral system. And so what Nietzsche says about that is that, well, you can look at philosophers' morality and it tells you something about them. Like some philosophers want to hide themselves. Some people want revenge against others. Some people want, you know, and what Kant wants is to be able to say, in every case, I know what to do.
Yeah.
And you should also know what to do. And so the criticism of moral philosophy as a whole, but of Kant specifically, is that he's just finger wagging, you know, and taking things as read, which actually aren't obvious, but also that philosophy on the whole is like taking the temperature of people's emotions, like
Yeah.
my moral principle is where it just betrays my weakness or something like that. And so and then there's a fourth one. Oh yeah, he talks about anarchists as well, and this is the letting go. He's like morality in general, this Christian morality is sort of becoming secular, this idea. And we'll talk about that in more detail once we start going through the text. But his fourth criticism is of modern people for whom the secularization of Christian morality is not happening fast enough, and they want to do a revolution. And a revolution to just flatten society so that everyone has this sort of is equal in terms of the amount of food they have to eat and the amount of work they have to do, and for Nietzsche this looks like complacency, a nice placated herd of cattle or something like that, and that it doesn't it hamstrings people who would want to who have the potential to express greatness, because when you have a herd and everybody's sort of doing their own thing within the bounds of this organized society, then it's not just striving to masterhood, striving to political rule that would be a threat to that. It would be any kind of striving at all. So anyone who expresses greatness sort of becomes an offense.
Yeah, any deviation from the
herd.
0 point.
Yeah, so that's where he starts talking about how what we need is not just a civilization of letting go, but a civilization of strict structures wherein people can rise vertically by mastering those structures. And he gives all sorts of examples. Artwork is the most vivid, where like David Lynch can go dreamy all day long, but if he doesn't understand how lights work, the movie's not going to make any sense. And so you have to have this dichotomy between the ability to let go and wait for inspiration and follow your instincts, but then be able to place that into a structured system in order to achieve greatness. So there's two things going on in this book, right? There's this critique and this sort of history of moral philosophies over time, sort of saying how that's all flat, that people are looking for this metaphysical underpinning of morals, but then their actual moral systems are not informed by those metaphysics. This is something I got from Keith 418 on the internet.
Oh, okay.
Values follow metaphysics, and then morals and ethics hopefully follow values. And in this case, in all these cases, Nietzsche's pointing out how they don't. The second thing that's going on is, okay, if their morals aren't coming from their metaphysics, where are they coming from? And so this is where he needs to do his deeper picture of the natural history of morals, talking about how they come from sociology, from evolutionary principles, from just the way civilization has progressed in order to keep civilization healthy. So, and that's where I'd like to start referring to the text. But do you have anything more to say about all of that before we go on?
Well, just basically the fact that it's this idea of the sort of herd mentality of things. There's the idea of trying to avoid suffering and placate and that sort of thing. So that as a goal, he even sort of describes it as if it was able to achieve that goal, then there would be no impetus for that drive anymore. And that reminds me of, various philosophical, religious, or political ideas that suffer the same sort of fallacy in the sense that they only exist in opposition to something. So if you took that opposition away, then it's gone. They don't have a reason to exist anymore. But more interesting, I think, is just the fact that it's like that assumption that the goal is to reduce suffering and increase comfort is not universal, in my opinion. And I think that's where the fallacy for that comes from. I think that's, and it's especially for the types who tend to spend a lot of time thinking and talking and writing and that sort of thing, as opposed to various other types of people. So this idea of trying to avoid suffering, it doesn't take long in a big city to go out and come across people who are clearly not trying to avoid suffering. They're doing anything they can to put themselves into the way of it sometimes. So it's like it's that there's an assumption that we have when we look at the world and think about the way that people are and what people want, where we tend to think everybody else is like us.
Well, you could have a Platonic chimera critique of that too, right? You could say that it looks like the homeless junkie is not trying to avoid suffering, but you could also say that his problems are all due to error. You know, like he gets high on the weekend and then spends the whole week miserable, but he's getting high to avoid suffering. Like he's trying to, forget about the problems of the world by getting fucking loaded, and then just misunderstands that, or because of all the complexities to do with addiction and withdrawal, and that this is not the most productive solution to that problem.
Sure, but yeah, that's just a rationalization, though. Like, I mean, if you look at people who get into gangs and like violent gangs and that sort of thing, how are they working towards avoiding suffering?
Right. So there's my theory of crime is pretty specific, and I think in some ways it's a Nietzschean theory of crime, but it's not directly related to the text.
But my point being is that
right,
it's like there's an assumption going on from the point of view that everybody thinks like I do, and I think I want to avoid suffering, and therefore anyone who's not doing things to avoid suffering is obviously in error. There's a fallacy involved.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I will say what I said I wasn't going to say. I think very often people who commit crimes, like there's this popular theory in the world right now that almost all crimes are committed because people are mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And that very often, not always, but very often we should call social workers instead of policemen, especially if it's just something like a wellness check or a civil disturbance, that meeting these sorts of things with force is not productive, and that they should be met with a kind of social support. And there's a way in which I understand this position. I think very often there are people having mental health crises that could use support, but I don't think that's the majority of genuinely criminal behavior.
Yeah.
I think the majority of genuinely criminal behavior is by people who are feeling themselves sort of restricted within normal legal systems, trying to express a degree of liberty and flourishing, and try to, feel the power and awe and volition that that's sort of beyond them in a structured society, so that because of sociological factors, or maybe their upbringing, or the city they happen to live in or something, they feel very restricted by the idea of just going to work at Taco Bell or something.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be cool if I were a drug dealer? Wouldn't that give me more cultural capital and more, finesse and better clothes, and then also the feeling that I'm just doing whatever I want. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm not doing whatever I want, I'm drug dealing, which is a very difficult and dangerous job, and puts you in a very restricted position, and you have to appeal to your clients and your suppliers and everything like that. It's very structured, but just because it's illegal, it feels like freedom, and it feels like and then putting yourself in that structure where there's where there's a power in it as well, right? Because the money's flowing through you, and there's maybe a chance to move up in the world. And if somebody crosses you, you can solve the problem with violence. Like, it's will to power in action.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that really comes back to will to power. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that it doesn't have to be that dichotomy between somebody who's a law-abiding citizen and somebody who's committing crimes. You can work within the system and operate on will to power in ways that are morally reprehensible by the standards of society at large.
Well, and everybody, according to Nietzsche, is motivated by this will to power because it's his fundamental metaphysical principle. Mm-hmm. And so when you see these philosophers out here who may have strange and radical metaphysical principles, but keep reaffirming the categorical imperative, lying is always wrong in every instance. That's a fear and we'll get into this hopefully soon. That's a fear of people deviating from the norms and the structures that you're invested in, and then pretending that every crime is a mental health episode because, the person just doesn't understand that their behavior is wrong. That's a Platonic move, right? That's the you wouldn't do evil unless you were in error. You have to be crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not crazy. It's the system that's wrong, man. It's not me. It's the system that's wrong.
And no matter how supposedly right you have the system, no matter how you manage to even the playing field for everyone, there's always going to be somebody there to specifically take advantage of that scenario.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Good. So before we start talking about the natural history of morals, why it is that people are invested in this kind of false sense of smug satisfaction that they know the difference between good and evil, we should say something about how this revaluation of values begins to happen. And Nietzsche says that it starts with, does he say the Jews? Depends on the translation you have. So for Nietzsche, herd morality, slave morality, whatever you want to call it, is specifically and explicitly a Jewish conspiracy against the Roman aristocracy to kind of overthrow the old master and slave dichotomy and create a world where the new masters are so fucked up about the idea of mastership that they have to pretend they're in service. Like in the OCO, for example, we have this phrase, to us, government is nothing but service. That's a perfect encapsulation of the I'm not in charge, man. It's always it's a democratic will of the people. You're the one who wants the tariffs, I guess. And so, I'm a public servant. The idea, instead of a master, a public servant.
Yeah, first amongst equals.
And and this idea that these things that are problematic in Nietzsche are mainly in his last posthumous work, The Will to Power, and the fault of his sister, who was an actual card-carrying Nazi by the end of her life. It's not true. I don't know to what degree she did fuck with that text, the short sections I've read from it are unproblematic, but there's lots of things problematic in Nietzsche, so there may be more in there, and maybe, and she actually was a Nazi. But the two things to say are, one, Nietzsche's xenophobic, but also has criticisms of German culture and society too. So he has a negative word to say about everyone. And the second thing is that he's trying to describe what he thinks of as being like a cultural movement.
Yeah.
So Nietzsche's conspiracy, not in this book, but in Beyond Good and Evil, he names the conspirators. He calls them Paul, John, and Mary. So he's talking about the Gospels. He says the Gospels are a psyop. And it's very difficult when you realize that he says, when he says like the Jews fucked up everything. That sounds terrible, especially in a world, of what's that document called? The Iron Mountain documents or something like that, where it's not a global, it's a forgery that talks about how Jews are going to take over the world or something like that. But in a world where there's this imaginary vast global conspiracy of secret Jews trying to destroy the world or whatever it is, it sounds like that's what Nietzsche's saying. Nietzsche's conspiracy is a different thing than that. And when you read the Gospels and you see Christ saying things like, let the dead bury their dead. You come with me now. Do not stay here to bury your father. Your family doesn't exist. You're with me. Or when you hear him saying things like, if a master slaps you on the cheek, turn the other cheek and just take it. It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to get in heaven. And then, of course, the Sermon on the Mount, which again and again he lists miserable people and says how blessed they are, and concludes with, the meek shall inherit the earth. It's clear that this document is deliberately trying to do what Nietzsche says it's doing.
Yeah.
He is. The Gospels are deliberately trying to plant this seed of a moral idea that will overthrow the Roman aristocracy.
Yeah, I think it's important not to get hung up on, like, not to have that unfortunate fact of, like, saying, basically referring to it as the Jews having been the source of it. That makes it really difficult to talk about it without having to address that first and foremost. But you're right, it's the cultural movement itself that manifested later on as Christianity and as Islam, but particularly as Christianity, and the ways in which that's affected people's morality and cultural kind of interactions and whatnot, and the way that that's become subconscious to all of us. So it's second nature.
It's the same thing as Masonic conspiracy, right? Like, some people will say the Masons are evil. This is, not now, but like in the late 19th century. The Masons are evil. You can't get a fucking job in this town unless you're a Mason. You're excluded from all social events. Like, the Masonry is controlling this town. And with hindsight, people will say, not really. Like, you just have a group of people that all know each other and subscribe to the same moral code and respect each other. And so if a stranger applies for the job versus someone that they know, a Mason, then the Mason is maybe more likely to get the job, because you already know the quality of this person's character. It's like having a personal handshake reference, or it's a nepotism hire.
Yeah, and when you have cultural, you have different areas of the city or different places where you'll have people tend to congregate together if they're all from the same place or the same backgrounds and that sort of thing. That's the most natural thing in the world. And you can end up with a situation where people have a support system as a result of that.
And so this idea of a conspiracy of Jews, no, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This idea of a conspiracy of Masons that are stopping other people from getting a job. It may be literally true. Like, they are all working together, and they are only hiring Masons, but they're not doing it because they're necessarily hateful
or trying to keep you down.
And it's not like they get together and wring their hands and go like immigrants can't have jobs. They're just hiring the people that they know because they like them. And so for Nietzsche, I think he thinks he's doing something descriptive, not saying that there's that his Jewish conspiracy is these people have all worked together, these documents have all worked together more correctly, because it's not necessarily people, it's the way these documents have been organized and venerated for 2,500 years that have sort of infected the culture with these ideas, and not necessarily, and it is problematic. It is anti-Semitic. It's not an excuse to be rude to Jews that or to endorse the Nazi Party. Like, I don't think Nietzsche is on this fascist trip. And I think his criticism of Napoleon, and specifically of weak people who support Napoleon because, oh, thank God there's finally a real leader, would also have applied to Hitler if he had lived long enough.
And not only that, even if he is saying things like that, there's still interesting things to, like, in terms of the way in which that cultural movement that manifested ultimately in Christianity and ended up being so strongly prevalent throughout the history of the past 2,000 years of Europe and various parts of the world. That's a really important thing to be able to look into. So whether or not you want to have criticisms of Nietzsche himself, this is still an important subject for us to be able to discuss and look into.
It would be really hard to talk about the natural history of morals without mentioning, at least in passing, the Bible.
Yeah.
The most fundamental moral text of the Western world since, 2,500 years.
Yeah.
And
the Bible is rooted in, there is a cultural context to it. There's a cultural context of the different tribes of people going on in that part of the world during the period of time that the Bible was amalgamated, and the various things going on there, the various ways in which the trials and tribulations affected the psychology of the people who were amassing this as a historical text, and the interplay with other cultures around them and that sort of thing. This is all important stuff in terms of the evolution of the thing.
And I think it's really a little bit weird that if he had just complained about Jesus and the Gospels and like even Christians, like if he had said like, yeah, the fucking Christians, we wouldn't have to make any disclaimers. It's only because it's only because he points out the fact that Jesus was a Jew that we have to feel defensive about it. And I think my personal like hot take on this is that the reason he calls them Jews is just to get under the skin of Christians. That that there's anti-Semitic Christians. And so if he wants them to feel bad about their own moral code, he can call their moral code Jewish. And then that's sort of like
the hypocrisy
is demeaning.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm not a Jew. Like it's like you're barbing an anti-Semite.
But also undermining the fact of their Christianity, because it's like, well, if you're that anti-Semitic, although I mean then perhaps that may be stretching it in the sense of like trying to justify Nietzsche.
I also think he's anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
but I think he's like, again, in a polemical work where he's trying to be deliberately offensive to large numbers of people. Who represent the moral power structure, and
you're right. He is trying to.
It's hurt. The moral power. The moral power structure is going to be, largely Christian power structure. Anyway, I think we should start. By the way, what translation do you have?
A good question. I don't recall. Let me double check here. Oh, it's R.J. Hollingdale.
That's wild. I also have the Hollingdale.
Oh, okay.
I assume,
very British-sounding name.
Yeah.
Because usually, like, the Kaufman is a...
Yeah, I assumed you were going to have the Kaufman, but we both have the Hollingdale. I think I was suggesting 201 to start with, but maybe we should start with 199. And again, these quotations are long, but I'm only going to maybe read 3 of these sections, which totals to about 5 pages. And I've sort of broken down his natural history into about 7 movements. So this is the picture in this period. This is the little thing that triggers a change. This is the picture in this period. This is the little thing that triggers a change. And this is how these values become instilled pre-philosophically, just from behavior and moving in culture with the world. Here's the thing. I said that I think he's pointing to the Gospels when he's complaining about the origins of these ideas, but anything he makes reference to in the rest of this text is going to be Old Testament. He's going to talk about basically the fall of man. He's going to talk about eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's going to talk about, I think it's Moses. So that complicates the picture a little bit of my saying, when he says Jews, he means Christians, because there's some Old Testament stuff in here. All right, so now that I've looked at it more closely, section 199 of this, for those of you playing our home game, Section 199 of this seems to be a kind of macrocosmic picture that says stage 1, stage 2, and does the whole natural history of morals in 2 big shots to give you kind of the grounds of working. And then section 200 is a tangent about people of mixed race, which I don't think we super need to read because it's problematic. It's like the Jewish thing, it's problematic. Unlike the Jewish thing, it doesn't seem to be central to his theory.
Granddad likes to throw bad terms around.
Yeah. But then 201 will deal with it in more in more granular detail, and that's where I have the 7 stages picked out. But let's get a 1,000-yard view here. 199. Inasmuch as ever since there have been human beings, there have also been human herds. family groups, communities, tribes, nations, states, and churches, and always very many who obey, compared with a very small number of those who command. Considering, that is to say, that hitherto nothing has been practiced and cultivated among men better or longer than obedience, it is fair to suppose that as a rule, a need for it is by now innate, as a kind of formal consciousness which commands, thou shalt unconditionally do that, unconditionally not do that. In short, thou shalt. Again, here's his kind of nod to Moshe and
the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. So he's trying to present kind of a Darwinian picture of how our drives and instincts begin to come about. If you're like me, a person who really likes primates, you can observe the way the family groups of other primates interact. Our closest relative.
Now, are you talking about the heads of particular Masonic style orders, or?
Oh no, I mean chimpanzees.
Oh, okay.
But I assume the same thing applies. That with in large herds of chimpanzees, you have a dominant top male, and you may have some top females, but you also have animals that do specialization. One may be a stronger hunter or a stronger war general, and these, but there'll still be only a few top men that are good at a few specific things, and all the other sort of members of the family group kind of organize themselves behind these top men, and as they go along through their lives, they vie for position, and so younger males, as they get stronger, may challenge the older ones,
patricians and plebeians.
Yeah. But and Nietzsche thinks it's probably the same with prehistoric human beings, that we lived in tribal groups, perhaps not very much like chimpanzees, perhaps more like bonobos, perhaps more like gorillas, but some system whereby leaders and followers were sort of naturally turned out in part of the group, and in order to be successful, groups had to have more followers than leaders, so actually we're evolutionarily predisposed to want to organize, work together, and follow commands.
Even looking at like old Roman history and that sort of thing, particularly before the Republic, or I guess I should say throughout its history, kind of going back before the Carthaginian Wars and all that sort of thing, there's a lot of the sense you get of like these old communities where it's like you have a little town and you'd have to fortify it because you'd have people like bands of marauders or just other communities and that sort of thing coming through, and you could have the horror of being wiped out, having people come in and just destroy everything, take everything, and do all the horrible business that they do under such circumstances. That's like going to be hardwired into us to a large extent. So living in fear, living in that kind of thing where, being hardwired for a certain degree of herd mentality makes sense in order to keep us all working together.
Well, and he's gonna talk more specifically about that later. This first point is about leaders and followers, but yes, this fear of the neighbor becomes important fairly soon. Then the next thing that happens is this need to follow, this need to obey, seeks to be satisfied and to fill out its form with a content. So the form of needing to follow, you need something to follow. That needs a content. In doing so, it grasps about wildly, according to the degree of its strength, impatience, and tension, with a little discrimination, as a crude appetite, and accepts whatever any commander, parent, teacher, law, class, prejudice, public opinion shouts in its ears. The strange narrowness of human evolution, its hesitations, its delays, its frequent retrogressions and rotations are due to the fact that the herd instinct of obedience has been inherited best and at the expense of the art of commanding. Again, he's talking about sort of Darwinian picture where, those who live to breeding age are more likely to pass on their traits to the offspring. Those are the most successful traits. And if we have a world in which there are very few commanders, then the people who are going to be the most sexually successful are going to be those who have the strength and the confidence to follow leaders and want leaders. And so and the criticism here is it doesn't matter who the leader is, or whether or not they're right or wrong, or what their skill is. Anyone with the confidence to lead gets to lead because people are so desperate to obey. And I imagine he's going to say that the quality of leadership is going to degrade naturally over time because of this, because if we're exalting our, as he says, our ability to obey over our ability to command, then the commanders get more obedient as time goes on.
That saying, every people deserves the leadership that they have. I forget who said that.
If we think of this instinct taken to its ultimate extravagance, there would be no commanders or independent men at all, or if they existed, they would suffer from a bad conscience. This bad conscience is a technical term. At least it becomes one with Sartre. I don't know what Nietzsche means by it exactly, but this specific manifestation is going to be, I'm a commander, but my instinct to obey is so strong that I'm all torn up inside about the idea of commanding. There would be no commanders or independent men at all, or if they existed, they would suffer from a bad conscience, and in order to be able to command, would have to practice a deceit upon themselves. The deceit, that is, that they too were only obeying. This state of things actually exists in Europe today, and I call it the moral hypocrisy of commanders. So I don't need to read all his examples, but the idea of the divine right of kings, right? I obey God, you obey me, or then the democratic idea, I obey the will of the people, I'm elected and so I work for you. All this stuff we kind of already talked about in the first half. He's calling this bad conscience because people have such a powerful instinct to obey and the leaders get so fucked up about it that they have to then pretend their authority comes from somewhere else, not from their own innate ability to command,
but also
because
that
maybe they don't have it.
Yeah, they're also sort of part of the herd themselves, just the first amongst equals.
Down to the bottom of the section, all this notwithstanding, what a blessing! What a release from burden becoming intolerable! The appearance of an unconditional commander for this herd animal type European. The effects produced by this appearance of Napoleon is the latest, greatest witness. The history of the effect of Napoleon is almost the history of the higher happiness this entire century has attained in its most valuable men and moments. So, I don't think this is saying, wow, Napoleon's such a great guy, because Napoleon's a French general who's trying to do revolution all across Europe and overthrow regional kings, liberate countries, and impose, a kind of like French-style democracy, which Nietzsche doesn't like, and a false French-style democracy because, it's actually Napoleon as an emperor. But he's saying that this is the happiest condition Europe's ever been in, because even though it's, nonstop bloodshed, people are so thrilled to have a leader. And it doesn't matter what the content is. The content can be terrible, but the highest happiness of Europe is in obeying an uncompromising leader who actually takes ownership of their own leadership.
Very good point. That's like that just goes to show, like, people ask how could people get behind the Nazis? Well, there you go. When you're caught up in the thrill of it and that sort of thing. The same thing we can argue for today, people getting caught up with leaders. I think there's a lot of disillusionment with leaders in the present moment, but there's also inevitably going to be a lot of people who are getting passionately caught up with particular leaders as well.
Yeah, I think this is super important because people will say the two positions on Nietzsche are either Nietzsche was a anti-Semite, therefore nothing he can say is important, or Nietzsche says things that are important, therefore he can't possibly have been an anti-Semite.
And that's good and evil right there.
And
that's the instinct to good and evil.
The truth is, Nietzsche does say things that are problematic, it's not only his sister and not only in one book, but he also, was being badly misunderstood by Hitler and the other Nazis if they took his writing as an endorsement of their policies, because it's just people desperate to fill their obedience with some kind of content, no matter how problematic.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think this is an endorsement of Napoleon. I think it's a criticism of the kinds of people who would follow Napoleon, and that criticism would also apply to the Nazi movement, which Nietzsche is occasionally accused of laying the philosophical groundwork for. So. Anyway, that's step 1, 2, 3. So step 1, tribal man has more followers than leaders. Followers become desperate for just any leader, and the quality of leadership degrades. And then finally, a modern state where even leaders pretend to be followers because they can't handle the pressures of leadership. And so a more granular picture with some more specific examples begins in chapter 201.
200 is the next one. Is that the one you're thinking of?
No, 200 is the one where he talks about how the war of self against self caused by being mixed race can eventually be overcome, and these mixed race people can become Ubermen because they're more self-aware, because they've reconciled this global conflict within themselves, like Romeo and Juliet, I'm half black, I'm not accepted in black communities, and I'm not accepted in urban white communities, and where do I go? I'm a slave and my dad and a slave master, and I'm so miserable. But like they people of mixed background have the potential to reconcile those kinds of internal tensions, that kind of self-hatred, and become a fully aware postmodern philosopher beyond good and evil.
So they can leverage themselves out of either.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it's critical to his theory at this point, and problematic enough that I didn't want to talk about it, but now I have. Let's go to 201. So long as the utility which dominates moral value judgment is solely that which is useful to the herd. So again, we're back way in step 1. So long as the objective is solely the preservation of the community, and the immoral is sought precisely and exclusively in that which seems to imperil the existence of the community. So long as that is the case, there can be no morality of love one's neighbor, supposing that even there is a constant little exercise of consideration, pity, fairness, mildness, mutual aid was practiced, supposing that even at this stage of society, all those drives and activities which are later honorably designated virtues and are finally practically equated with morality, in this era they do not yet by any means belong to the domain of moral valuation. They are still extra-moral. An act of pity, for example, was during the finest ages of Rome considered neither good nor bad, neither moral nor amoral. And even if it was commended, this commendation was entirely compatible with a kind of involuntary disdain, as soon, that is, as it was set beside any act which served the welfare of the whole, of the res publica. One more. Ultimately, love one's neighbor was always secondary, in part conventional and arbitrary, illusory when compared with fear one's neighbor. So, I was going to say, do you understand? But you've spent the last month reading this too. Do you understand goes out to the ether. So this is sort of phase 1 of the development, where people are very, very, tribal. And he says the earliest stages of the Roman Empire, this is where the conquering is beginning to happen. And so the moral goods in this period are going to be whatever's good for the tribe, the little group, the herd. And that, it's okay to have pity and sympathy and affection, and to help help the less fortunate, at least within your own small social group. But what's going to be morally right is things that protect your social group from competing, rival, dangerous social groups. So the highest moral principle is actually fear one's neighbor rather than love one's neighbor, because your neighbor might come and steal your.
It ultimately justifies the love
whatever,
one's
your
neighbor,
livestock.
because it's like, if you picture this, like what I was saying earlier about the fortified town, the fear of one's neighbor is what bonds that town.
Right. And so within the little community, there can be love between those people who are, maybe next door neighbors or in the same.
It's like, I
cult,
remember,
right.
what's it called? Joe Rogan. There was some conversation a few years back of like people in Saskatchewan being really friendly and all that sort of thing, and hospitable. And the theory being that they were throwing back and forth, being that, it's like such a, dangerous place to live in the wintertime that it's like you really, you can't do it on your own. You have to sort of, help each other out and that sort of thing. So it's a very different environment in which to live. And there's something to be said for that,
Well, this is a Nietzschean view too, and it's more explicit in the genealogy of morals than it is in this paper. But the idea that what the slave morality is the morality of people who aren't actually strong enough to do things for themselves. So they become obsessed with this idea of building community because that's what they need to do to survive and work together. They need to work together in order to survive. So the real refined kind of highest, being, at least in the early period, before artwork or something, would be the kind that was radically independent and vicious and strong and could do everything for themselves. And if they couldn't do it for themselves, they could take slaves and have the slaves work for them and do the things they couldn't do efficiently by themselves. And then the slaves would get together and talk about what an asshole that guy is. And it's like, he's such a, making us do all this hard work. Like, doesn't he understand that what really brings people together is community? Like, we're working together. We're the ones who are, the Marxist version of this. We're the ones who are picking this fruit. We should be the ones who get to eat this fruit just because he told us to, and there wouldn't be fruit without his organizational skills. We're the ones actually doing the work. So, like, doesn't he understand that this community of people working together, that's real righteousness. And so this is the revaluation of values, where being weak and subservient becomes these lack of good things becomes the virtue of goodness against this kind of monster who's controlling everything. And the fact that he has good things means he's evil. And we're gonna touch on that a little bit here, but yeah, the way that applies to people living in Saskatchewan, the desperate need of community, because you might have to borrow your buddy's generator because the power could go out for the 14th time, And then, so we've got this first step where people are living in small groups, supporting each other, trying to find military strength, social strength, economic strength, and be prepared to go to war when the neighbors come over. The next stage is, once the structure of society seems to have in general fixed and made safe from external dangers, it is the fear of one's neighbor which again creates new perspectives of moral valuation. So we're no longer afraid of invasion from outside. What are we afraid of now? There are certain strong and dangerous drives, such as enterprisingness, foolhardiness, revengefulness, craft, rapacity, ambition, which hitherto had not only been honored from the point of view of the social unit under different names, naturally, than those we have chosen here, but also mightily developed and cultivated because they were constantly needed to protect the community as a whole against enemies of the community as a whole. These drives are now felt to be doubly dangerous. Now that the diversionary outlets for them are lacking, and are gradually branded as immoral and given over to calumny. Antithetical drives and indications now come into moral honor. Step by step, the herd instinct draws its conclusions. How much or how little that is dangerous to the community, dangerous to equality, resides in opinion, in a condition or emotion, in a will, in a talent. That is the new moral perspective. Here again, fear is the mother of morality. So this is the list of qualities that were important in the old system. When you're living in a tribal group, competing for resources against violent, other violent tribal groups, you might want leaders who are enterprising, foolhardy, revengeful, crafty, rapacious, ambitious. You might want those qualities so that because those sorts of virile sort of drives help protect you from your neighbors. These are like war-like qualities, right? Mm-hmm. But now we've made peace with our neighbors. We're no longer in small little polises. We have a country, and the country is fairly economically stable. But we still have this warrior class of people with all these really aggressive, robust tendencies. And now we're no longer afraid of neighboring communities. We're afraid of our neighbors within our community. And so we need to sort of create a moral system that says that's a little bit more timid, and we do this gradually. So when the highest and strongest drives break passionately out and carry individuals far above and beyond the average, the lowlands of the herd consciousness, the self-confidence of the community goes to pieces. Its faith in itself, its spine, as it were, is broken. Consequently, it is precisely these drives which are most branded and calumniated. So there's a phase 2.5 I've said here, where now we're no longer just afraid of violent people. We're afraid of people who are the highest, the strongest, and most passionate, not because they present any real material danger, but because they kind of humiliate the rest of us with their excellence. So anyway, anything you want to say about any of that?
Yeah, I mean,
we sort of talked about it a little bit, but already, because I think it's the sort of meatiest chunk of the reading, so we were hungering to get to it. But yeah,
I mean, it does sound a little bit heavy-handed to an extent if I try to compare it to the actual reality of things, because there's aspects like, for instance, those who stand above the herd are often celebrated and are often idolized, and there's ways in which that isn't true. And there's also the herd itself, very commonly, in my experience, pays lip service to the morality of the herd. Meanwhile, doing whatever else, but feeling justified in like saying, well, this is what I believe, and actually thinking that, like really believing that is what they live by. Meanwhile, being complete hypocrites and acting in a very different way and that sort of thing. So
yeah, there are places in Nietzsche where he accounts for this kind of hypocrisy, right? And there are some short sections that I maybe haven't marked out to read, where he talks about how this kind of in Beyond Good and Evil, it's called ressentiment. The hatred for the ruling classes, which becomes the hatred of the self, and how that creates these kind of disordered, hypocritical, people that you're describing. But this is sort of like a broad sociological picture of the kind of movement of the glacial age movement of cultures over time. This is maybe we started with the earliest periods of the Roman Empire, so maybe 100 BC, and we're going through in 7 stages. So even though, just like with the Thelemic aeons, all 7 of these conditions exist right now on Earth, and in each individual, there are sort of prevailing forces in each age, which mean they're more exemplified by one particular
Yeah, and there's another
current
place.
than another.
There's another place in which he addresses that aspect of time as well, in the sense that it's almost like he says that there's a period where it's sort of like the repression of morality seems as though it's stifling the drive for that freedom or that will to power and that sort of thing, but perhaps as a means of saving up the energy for or replenishing the energy. So it's almost like as if there's stages that we see in that respect as well. You could very much see the Puritan times of the 1800s and prior leading inevitably, in a sense, to the more unrepressed periods from the mid to late 1900s and on.
And in terms of what you actually see out in the world, right? In terms of oh, do you think this makes sense? Are we afraid of excellence, or are we wanting to, these sorts of things? So in the late 19th century, when Nietzsche's writing, the two major sort of populist political movements in Europe are like it's like anarchists, communists, and fascists, right? And he complains specifically about anarchists earlier, saying, this kind of he doesn't say laissez-faire, laissez-aller way of going about things,
freeness of all
this
things,
sort of shapelessness. I think maybe this idea of fear of excellence is being laid more poignantly at their feet. But don't we see similar things in leftist circles now? I don't know how you align politically. It's easier for me to criticize the left than the right because I just have no sympathy for almost anyone on the right. But as a leftist, I can be self-aware enough to say, like, yeah, this is a big problem in leftist circles, right? Is like especially among the loudest ones, the unwillingness to allow the smartest people in the room to speak about how to solve problems, because the smartest people in the room don't experience those problems day to day. And so their position is invalid, when really, like, if the least fortunate among us have the least access to good information, good communication, good education, they may have a direct experience, but isn't the problem the fact that they aren't smart enough to solve their own problems because they've been systematically kept under a bush? But then when anyone who might have an idea starts to talk, they're told to check their privilege.
Yeah, you know what? That's actually a very good point. Like, it does seem like this is specifically very strongly true in the case of like the leftist world at the moment. And that's why it didn't come to mind as like a universal thing, because I try to, if I have to play the political game, I'd say I'm more centrist in the sense that I try to hear all things, and I think everyone's an idiot. So frankly, I'm not going to buy into one side or the other. I think it's like I'd prefer to go beyond good and evil, frankly.
Well, I think the people on the right might be more susceptible to his criticism of Napoleon right now. Even though there are good, rightist ideas and things that I think are worth talking about on the economic right or even the social right, I think the desperation of these people to serve just any master who seems like a master. Yeah. They don't have to be smart, they don't have to be good looking, they don't have to be charismatic, they don't have to be interesting. They just have to have the self-confidence to say, yeah, I want to be in charge.
Yeah. So you have the comparison right there. That's actually a good analogy for it. You have on the one side exactly that, and then on the other side the reverse, the averse of that, where it's basically a suspicion of anyone who tries to stand above the herd.
It's not exactly the Italian fascist movement versus the Italian anarchist movement, but there's some analogies to be drawn.
There comes a point of morbid mellowing and over-tenderness in the history of society at which it takes the side even of him who harms it, the criminal, and does so honestly and wholeheartedly. So this touches on what you were talking about earlier with the idea of like, well, people who are criminals, it's not their fault. There's obviously like a mental illness thing, et cetera, et cetera. Punishment, that seems to it somehow unfair. Certainly the idea of being punished and having to punish is unpleasant to it, makes it afraid. Literally exactly what you were talking about, so nothing new under the sun.
Sorry, yeah, I know I did say it was a Nietzschean criticism that wasn't relevant here, but maybe it is a Nietzschean criticism and maybe it is relevant.
Yeah, so it definitely does take part. And that is unpleasant to it, makes it afraid. Is it not enough to render him harmless? Why punish him as well? To administer punishment is itself dreadful. With this question, herd morality, the morality of timidity, draws its ultimate conclusion. Supposing all danger, the cause of fear, could be abolished, this morality would therewith also be abolished. It would no longer be necessary. It would no longer regard itself as necessary. He who examines the conscience of the present-day European will have to extract from 1,000 moral recesses and hiding places always the same imperative, the imperative of herd timidity. We wish that there will one day no longer be anything to fear. Everywhere in Europe, the will and way to that day is now called progress. And this is like 130 years ago, 140 years ago. So, yeah, nothing new under the sun.
A little bit chilling, eh?
Yeah. And I mean, it's if it does nothing else for you, like if you're listening to this and thinking you are fiercely on the one side, or fear, like for instance Nietzsche's side, or if you're fiercely against it and thinking, no, there's like, what is he complaining about, or these are good things to be in service of, then I would just say, yeah, like the whole idea here is to look closely at those drives, not to decide which side you're on. That's not the point.
Yeah, I mean, any sidedness is. I think points at what Crowley meant when he said, I have never in my life disgraced myself by voting. Right? Because when you align yourself with a political movement, you necessarily align yourself with their political causes. Mm-hmm. And people can say, I voted for, say, Donald Trump. It doesn't necessarily mean I agree with everything in his platform, but of the two options, he just seemed better to me.
Yeah,
and that's fine. That's the conventional approach, and it is true that we live with the consequences of our elections, But whether or not you agree with everything in his platform, it's all on the table as things that might happen. Mm-hmm. And now political parties don't follow through on everything in their platform ever anyway. So you might just be rolling the dice and saying, okay, well, these 5 things that seem like radical and stupid to me, maybe these are the things that won't end up happening. Maybe there's enough checks and balance in our system, or maybe they're insincere about this. Maybe they're just courting, some sort of populist movement in some district that I'm not even aware of, and I can be a single issue voter. For example, I'm a Canadian. I think you are too. The only thing that matters to me in an American political candidate is foreign policy.
Yeah,
I could give a fuck. You guys go ahead and vote for the kind of society you want to live in. But like, as a foreign entity, I'm worried about foreign policy. But like, if I were to, sort of start endorsing, or if there was some way in which I could vote in that election, which I can't, and I voted based on foreign policy, I would be actively supporting, political positions that I feel actively hostile to. So it's a delusion, a watering down of your ability to have your own opinions when you start throwing your weight behind parties and candidates. I'm not telling people not to vote; they can do whatever the fuck they want. but this idea that you're talking about like not deciding which side you're on, but instead just deeply interrogating your own values and instincts.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we run into problems with Nietzsche for most people, because, an adolescent male will read Nietzsche and draw certain conclusions, feel validated in certain ways, and thrilled in certain ways, and basically be reading it from a very strong slanted point of view. Whereas you'll get somebody who's reading it and being very dismissive of it from the opposite point of view, instead of actually taking things and reading more deeply into it. So, we have this thing that I was pointing out, that some of what he's talking about sounds a little bit kind of oversimplified in some respects, but it's getting at certain points. And as you say, he addresses other things in other places. So if you can read this, I don't know, intelligently, then maybe it's not going to be just the good or evil that you're trying to make it into.
So the fourth stage of this, we've just finished with stage 3, where we have a safe culture, except for people who deviate, perhaps violently, and then a safe culture where we have people who deviate perhaps in terms of excellence, and that is intimidating, because what we want is safety and homogeny, and we're afraid of our neighbors. And so now he's going to say that this culture of safety has spread all across Europe, and including into the neighboring states and the ones that are European colonies and the ones over which we have political influence. It's like most of the world is umbrellaed under this European hegemony, and there's one culture. And again, he makes an Old Testament reference. He said, "We now believe we understand what Adam was supposed to have understood. That is the knowledge of good and evil." And so now we're sort of moving into a fourth stage of this kind of cultural evolution. He says, morality in Europe today is herd animal morality. That is to say, we understand the thing, only one kind of human morality, besides which, before which, after which, many other, above all higher moralities are possible or ought to be possible. So he's saying that we should be able to look beyond this monoculture and evaluate and see whether higher moralities are possible. But we can't, because of the ubiquity of the lack of and the credulity with which we regard the current moral condition. And it's just that there's nothing else to read. Remember when I said you have to read Crowley and someone else, otherwise you can't understand? This is Nietzsche's complaint. There's no one else to read on morality. Everyone's saying the same thing. But against such a possibility, against such an ought, this morality defends itself with all its might, saying obstinately and stubbornly, I am morality itself, and nothing is morality besides me. Indeed, with the aid of religion, which has gratified and flattered the sublimest animal herd desires, it has got to the point where we discover, even in political and social institutions, an increasingly evident expression of this morality. So what I'm calling stage 4 of this evolution from, tribal morality to civilized, modern, quote unquote, civilized morality. The stage 4 is when this begins to infect all of our cultural institutions, and so that the churches, the businesses, the governments endorse these instincts and make them seem ubiquitous. And then there's a fifth movement. So now stage 4, the morality has infected the church. Stage 5, the democratic movement inherits the Christian, but the tempo of this movement is much too slow and somnambulant for the more impatient, for the sick and the suffering and the sad instinct. So this is actually 5 and 6 together. So the democratic movement inherits the Christian morality, and now maybe it's, people say this all the time, and it seems like fucking nonsense. And the atheists who argue on that side of the debate will say, I don't need Christianity to know that slavery is wrong, and in fact, the Bible endorses slavery in several places. And the Christian will say, like, the way you know there's a God is that everybody has the same moral perspective. That's how could everybody have the same moral perspective if God wasn't placing the true right way to behave in your heart? And more atheists will say, no, you can have a true moral perspective just based on evolution. And Nietzsche's showing how this evolution actually does create a ubiquitous moral perspective, but it's not necessarily true.
They're both actually using the same the same cultural moral perspective. Just in denial about it.
It's weird that that the Christian is endorsing the Nietzschean viewpoint. About how
and the atheist is endorsing the Christian viewpoint.
That's right. And so, but maybe you can see that when he says the democracy inherits Christian morality, he doesn't mean if a man lies with another man as he would with a woman, he should be stoned to death. He means this idea of love thy neighbor as thyself.
Everybody having a voice,
giving to charity,
and becoming
or the meek shall inherit the earth. Like, if Christ wants the meek to inherit the earth, and then democracy wants all people to have a voice and have a say in how this country is governed, and that the ruling party is only a figurehead in service of let's say the middle class, then that's the kind of move Nietzsche's talking about when he means that the democratic values are essentially Christian values, because they come from this same movement, the same gospel movement.
Incidentally, I just want to point out, just because it's easy to read into this like a specifically linear progress, but I just want to sort of undermine that slightly by pointing out that democracy was formed in ancient Greece. And the idea of the first among equals, I'm pretty sure, was actually, I don't know if it was started with this, but it was, I believe it was strongly established with the first Roman emperors. Like, they didn't call themselves emperors. Well, I guess the term imperator would be pretty much equivalent to that, but they would call themselves princeps, which is where we get the word prince from, which is the first among equals and that sort of thing. So I think there was at that time even a sort of idea of the emperor being the first among equals, even though it didn't really manifest that way.
Yeah, there's a sort of constant churning of this kind of stuff. And Nietzsche is capable of thinking of it in terms of deep time, because I think there's a relationship between philology and the sort of Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European stuff that I became curious about. And when he talks about his great blonde beasts of men on horseback rampaging across Europe, and how their slaves became the founders of slave morality, that's all happening in prehistory. There's no writing about that. And it is very similar to what modern sort of Proto-Europeans think about, is like these horse riders who were rampaging across the steppe, in Russia, in Syria, in Eastern Europe and stuff, that these guys were the founders of culture, basically, and that every modern language has words and stories inherited from this sort of like. And initially, Proto-European was just a language, but there's been a recent attempt in the last 50 years to try to tie that language to what we understand about archaeology and sociology, to find a people group that would have spoken this language, and they do appear to be nomadic horse people, like Nietzsche guessed. Probably not blonde.
So you mean centaurs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When
centaurs.
you say
Hor-
horse
yeah,
people.
horse people. Yeah, the bottom half human legs, the top half horse arms.
Yeah.
The worst way
It's
to
like
do a centaur.
human arms for legs and horse heads for arms. Yeah.
So he's capable of talking about it in this way in terms of like things that are happening prehistorically. Also able to say that, talk about it in reference to the Old Testament, where, he's saying that, the Jews are the prototypical slaves because of the bondage in Egypt and the subsequent bondage in Babylon that gets less attention. But he's also able to talk about it in terms of the Jesus movement and the revolution against Rome.
Yeah, at which point the Jews were subjugated to Rome.
Yeah, and then also able to talk about it in terms of 19th century politics with Napoleon and the anarchists. So there's
Napoleon and the Anarchists. That sounds like a great late night talk show or something.
Well, no, you know what? Like a ska band, not a ska band.
Ska band.
What are they called? Before reggae, there was this kind of like boogie music. What's it called?
Bebop.
Bebop would be a cool bebop band name too. But anyway, the sort of proto reggae, Napoleon and the Anarchists would be a good name for that kind of music. But so yeah, there's this kind of. I do think that when he's talking about these eras, he means them literally in terms of a chronology, but he's also able to talk about it in terms of happening multiple times throughout all of history. For him, Aristotle is and the whole early Greek philosophy movement is slavery against Homer. That Homer represents what's brute and robust and natural and poetic, and that there's a tinge of this slave morality and ressentiment in the Socratic philosophers as well. So
Plato and Socrates were really, really, really heavily influential on Christianity as well. So, I mean, to lay everything at the feet of the Jews is a little bit
it's not
disingenuous.
exactly what he does. Right?
It's not what he does,
but it's a big part of the picture because those texts have been so influential. And but rhetorically, it sounds gross.
Sure does catch your attention.
I think it sounds deliberately gross.
Yeah, exactly.
So this phase of democracy inheriting the dominant moral system from Christianity is going to be my phase 5, and then phase 6. But this tempo of movement is much too slow and somnolent for the more impatient, for the sick and suffering of the sad instinct is arrested by the ever more frantic baying and ever more undistinguished fang-bearing of the anarchist dogs, which now rove the streets of European culture, apparently the reverse of the placid, industrious democrats and revolutionary ideologues, and even more so of the stupid philosophers, the brotherhood fanatics who call themselves socialist and want a free society, in quotes. They are, in fact, the ones with them all in their total and instinctive hostility towards every form of society other than that of the autonomous herd, to the point of repudiating even the concept of master and servant. And then there's a French thing that means neither God nor master, says the socialist formula. At one in their tenacious opposition to every special claim, every special right and privilege, that is to say, in the last resort of every right, for when everyone is equal, no one has any rights.
And that seems to call back what he said earlier about if this herd mentality of trying to avoid suffering and making for comfort had its way, there would be no need for itself, its own drives.
And then it goes into what you were saying about punitive justice. For when everyone is equal, no one has any rights. At one, in their mistrust of punitive justice, as if it were an assault on the weaker, and injustice against the necessary consequences of all previous societies, but equally at one in the religion of pity, in sympathy with whatever feels, lives, suffers, down as far as the animal, up as far as God, the extravagance of pity for God belongs in a democratic era. At one and all, in the cry and impatience of pity, in the moral hatred of suffering in general, in their almost feminine incapacity to remain spectators of suffering, to let suffer, at once the involuntary gloom and sensitivity under whose spell Europe seems threatened with a new Buddhism, at one in their faith in the morality of mutual pity, as if it were morality itself and the pinnacle, the attained pinnacle of man, the sole hope of the future, the consolation of the present, and the greatest redemption from all forms of guilt at the past, at one and all, in their faith in the community as the Savior, that is to say, the herd themselves.
And that brings to mind, I can't remember if it was Nietzsche or Schopenhauer who was critical of Germans for their constant, just run-on sentences. It's a bit like me derailing the whole argument by saying there, not there.
What I wanted to say about this and why I wanted to read it is there's this idea of when people are critical of charitable operations or of government intervention with people who are on disability or something like this, or people often think of it as being like they call it the nanny state, right? And a nanny is like someone who takes care of children, right? So we want to put down and demean and insult the recipients of charity, the recipients of government assistance, and we feel it in ourselves, even though we have this ingrown need to obey. It is kind of embarrassing. If you break your ankle and you're walking with a cane and somebody holds the door for you, or when I was pushing a stroller, people would often try to hold the door for me, but I can do it, and then. Nobody knows how to hold the goddamn door. They try to pull it open and then they stand in the way, so you have to plow them over to get through, and then they won't move because they think they're doing something helpful. And it's embarrassing to be helped. And the language we use for this in English all across the board is infantilizing language. We speak of, it sort of feels like babyish, or something. And I do think we have, which Nietzsche doesn't acknowledge, I do think we have these kind of innate, natural drives, not just to obey, but to help. I think it hurts us to see other people in pain, and that it's not just cultural conditioning, but that there's a real innate, deep instinct about it. When I had my son, and you realize how helpless a baby is, you realize exactly the appropriate place to put those kinds of feelings. We have this because we have these huge brains and we're helpless for most of our lives. We're not like deer that just learn to walk and fuck off, 6 months later, or 6 weeks, learn to walk in 2 hours and then, we're basically adults in 6 weeks. We need to be supported and we need to support each other. And so, and this is in us because of the way that we parent, longer by twice as much than any other primate even. Orangutans parent almost as long as we do, 10, 11, 12 years. And it's because orangutans are largely solitary, so they don't have a group to work with, and the things they need to eat, they're so complicated. It takes that long to teach a young person what's appropriate to eat or not. But so we do have these instincts for love and compassion and support and charity and all the rest of it, because we're sometimes parents. And so when you see a homeless person on the street and you're tickled by that anxiety of oh, that person's in a bad condition, somebody needs to help that person, and you maybe give them, rather than just throwing your change, which is what they actually want, you say you do the right thing and say come with me, I'll buy you a cup of hot soup. The reason they often won't do that is not because they're not really hungry. That's a misunderstanding of the problem. They won't do it because you're treating them like a child. And you're having those feelings is a misplaced You know, it's because you've never been a parent. So when he says this this feminine incapacity to remain spectators of suffering or to let suffer, what he means is maternal. Anyway, I think somewhere in this reading there's also this idea of how you kind of innately expect service from those you help, but I haven't found it yet. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
And I think that's like what you're saying is like pertinent as well, because it's easy again to read this as sort of black or white, like either you're part of the herd or you're the lone wolf who's, you know, rising above the herd and that sort of thing. And I think to go to that extreme is missing. Well, whether or not it's missing the point, I think it doesn't actually reflect reality, because we do have social aspects to us, and that is an important aspect to us. So to just say like, oh, I'm all, you know, Nietzschean because I'm just going off on my own, sure, whatever, you know, if that gets you off, I guess, but I don't think it's really that helpful.
And remember what he says in the very, very beginning of what we've read today, that in the earliest days of the Roman Empire, acts of charity, pity, generosity, kindness people were indifferent to them.
Yeah.
It's not that they were evil. You know, it's that kind of thing was like, you know, maybe a part of the culture, maybe not, but that these things were done. You know, people would have friends and they would care about each other, but it just wasn't like. It wasn't like, oh, what a saint you are.
Yeah, it wasn't moralized, let's say.
Oh, what a good person. You know, they were just doing something nice for somebody else, and it didn't mean anything. And then you, as soon as it became like your charitable instincts became so exalted that they overtook your ability to, you know, destroy the enemy, then your charitable instincts began to be seen with disdain. But they're at baseline, they're indifferent. And now that we've come all the way up to the modern era, we have one more little reading about the future, and whither must we direct our hope? Towards new philosophers. This is section 203. Towards new philosophers, we have no other choice. Towards spirits strong and original enough to make a start on antithetical evaluations and to reverse and revise eternal values. Towards heralds and forerunners, towards the men of the future, the present will knot together and constrain, which compels the will of millennia onto new paths. And what's the job of these people? He doesn't really know. You know, the new morality, the beyond good and evil morality is not dealt with, at least in this chapter, and I think it's not dealt with in a satisfactory way in Nietzsche at all. He just thinks, oh, there's going to be some sort of Superman that's going to figure this all out. But the big task is to put pressure to test virtues by which a soul could grow to such heights and power it would feel compelled to these tasks, to the task of devising the new system of morality, a revaluation of values under whose novel pressure and hammer a conscience would be steeled, a heart transformed to brass, so that it might endure the weight of such a responsibility, the responsibility of the new philosophy. On the other hand, the need for such leaders, the terrible danger that they might not appear, or might fail, or might degenerate, these are our proper cares and concerns. Do you know that, you free spirits? These are the heavy, remote thoughts and thunderclouds that pass across our life's sky. So our job in this era is to be afraid that that this seventh phase, this new generation, will never come, and to write philosophy and to do work to put pressure on the future, so that this work becomes in the future absolutely necessary. And so this book is he says it's a weight that will compress the heart and turn it to brass, so that the next generation will have the courage to do this new philosophy. And I don't think Nietzsche would have necessarily liked the AA. I think he would have thought it was too religious-y, too kind of backward looking, but I would suggest that Crowley's project in the AA in Magick, the idea of creating adepts is the idea of creating a future wherein this necessary new man,
the perspective that's required
born.
for this is cultivated.
Yeah,
You know, I think that's the thing. It's like if we want to help to cultivate this future, the best way to do that is to look seriously and sincerely at the drives that are driving us and the sort of default morality, and being more conscious, not just falling on one side or the other, not just falling into good or into evil.
Here's another way he describes the same thing a little bit earlier in the same paragraph. To teach man the future of man as his will, as dependent on human will, to prepare for the greatest enterprise and collective experiments in discipline and breeding, so as to make the end of that gruesome dominion of chance and nonsense that has hitherto been called history. Remember when we were reading Energized Enthusiasm, and one of the threads that was pulled was what I was kind of loosely calling Crowley's eugenics program of, we put the initiate through all kinds of tests of life and death to make sure they're physically strong enough, and then we put them through all sorts of tests of initiation to make sure they're morally, dispositionally, intellectually strong enough, spiritually strong enough. Here I've underlined discipline and breeding. And so this is very, very obliquely, very, very briefly, just hit and fade, in and out. Nietzsche's very similar eugenics program.
It does seem like in a lot of ways you could buy into the idea that Crowley's pretty much read Nietzsche and then been inspired to go on to do everything that he did.
I don't understand how books like this don't end up on the AA reading list, maybe just because every important person at the time was already reading them, or maybe because the best ones weren't in translation and Crowley was reading them in German. He did read German. But yeah, this is essential. I mean, he calls many people saints, but Nietzsche's the only other person he calls a prophet. And he's
like Saint John to Crowley's Christ, I guess.
Yeah, that's what people say, but it's this the philosophical foundations. I think Crowley's a fairly minor philosopher, and I think there's a way in which he could be taught at university to people doing 20th century philosophy. There's this little window of important ideas, and the reason he's not taught is because his writing is not particularly systematic, although sometimes it is. Also because
Wait, are you talking about Nietzsche or Crowley?
Crowley. Yeah.
That's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek statement there.
Yeah, well, Nietzsche is at the tail end of an era when it was still okay to be unsystematic and outside of the university system. Although he was living on a pension from his university for basically his entire life. He just never actually taught more than 1 or 2 years, I think. But yeah, I think Crowley's a minor philosopher that could be given attention in academic philosophy if anyone were disposed that way. It might not be helpful to Thelemites, but it's a world that could be approached. But the major philosopher behind his writing, upon whose work he's commenting, is often Nietzsche. There's a few other ones too, but often Nietzsche.
And this is the thing. This is kind of the field that I feel most in alignment with, in the sense of the way that this thread moves through Nietzsche and into Crowley and informs Thelema. This is like really interesting to me as far as I'm concerned. This is kind of like a big part of what the project is. I think a lot of people get into Thelema and are just obsessed with thinking of it from a different point of view, where none of this really comes into play. But to me, this is like really fundamentally important.
Well, to use Nietzsche's language roughly, it's the content.
Yeah.
The AA gives you the form, but the question of what you're actually doing, like what's the point? The AA is a time capsule of everything that's important in Western culture, at least everything that was important to Crowley, to the equinox too. I see you have your set displayed nicely. The equinox too, he explicitly says this is a time capsule because the book of the law says the world is coming to an end, and maybe if I can get a lot of these people to buy these magazines, then maybe 1 or 2 copies will survive into the coming catastrophe and make it out into the actual new aeon, so that my thought will be remembered. And these mystery schools are also a way of preserving, this legacy going back to, the beginning of time, hypothetically, but also using that education, that background, that influence to push culture forward. And it's that Nietzschean context that tells us what that forward movement should look like.
Yeah, and that brings to mind an image that Eliphas Levi, somebody we haven't really delved into yet, one of his phrases is, the sheath has the depth of the sword. Doesn't say it exactly like that, but that, speaking of form and content, it's kind of a nice image that I want to throw out there.
Anything else you want to say about all that right now?
Yeah, so one phrase that I'm going to catch real quick is from 188. The essential and invaluable element in every morality is that it is a protracted restraint. And I like that because it sort of points out the fact that a protracted restraint, that's like Crowley's constantly talking about self-discipline. And what is that if not protracted restraint?
Yeah.
So I think it's like to again see this as, well, you have to pick a side. One side or the other is a mistaken approach, I think.
Yeah.
Morality has its role.
What he says about artists fitting forms, says a lot about that too. I also found the section I was looking for. It's actually in 194, where one would like to possess a people, and all the higher arts of Cagliostro and Cataline seem to him right for that end. Another, with more refined thirst for possession, says to himself, one may not deceive where one wants to possess. He is irritated and dissatisfied with the idea that the mask of him which rules his heart of the people, so I must let myself be known, first of all, know myself. He's talking about relationships with women and how some people, are satisfied with just the sexual conquest, but some people they don't really feel that they fully possess their partner, that they're fully in that relationship unless it's themselves in the relationship. So you have to know yourself fully and then have the confidence to reveal yourself fully and then still be accepted, still be accepted into this loving marriage. He uses the language of possession. You don't really own a woman until she fully knows you. And there's some stuff in Liber Aleph about whoredom and how the prostitute is a mirror, and you sort of she sees you so that therefore you see yourself. This is the magical image of Babylon. The sort of the function of whoredom is to clarify the aspirant, the initiation, or something like that. And so here when he says fully know yourself so that you can be fully known. Yeah,
so it's essentially, I mean, it doesn't say that explicitly, but it's like in order to fully possess, you must be fully possessed.
Well, it doesn't say the thing about being possessed, but it's being fully comprehended and still accepted.
Yeah, what he's actually using it as is an analogy for those who lead, who wished. So the idea of possessing a woman, mate,
right,
as being an analogy for one who feels the need to possess a people or to basically rule the herd in some manner.
Here, somebody told me that my criticism of what I said about Nietzsche's criticism of charity was wildly off base. Here, the very next sentence. Among the helpful and charitable people, one almost always finds the clumsy deceitfulness which first adjusts and adapts him who is to be helped. as if, for example, he deserves help, desires precisely their help, would prove profoundly grateful, faithful, and submissive to them in return for all the help he has received. With these imaginings, they dispose of those in need as if they were possessions, and are charitable and helpful at all only from a desire for possession. They are jealous if one frustrates or anticipates them as they want to help. So what I think what I said was that the criticism of charity, Nietzsche's criticism of charity, was that by giving to the poor, you indebt them to you. They become like your little employees, right? And to the degree that that's off base, I don't know, but it just seems like this in this section. This is what I was referring to, where he says that that people who give, there's always this kind of weak, pathetic selfishness that imagines that the person in need not only wants help, but wants my help specifically, and that I feel a sense of ownership when I give it to them. It's a will to power. It's a self-aggrandizing activity. And I'm humiliated if someone else gets there first or does better than I did. Like, oh, I should call the police. Don't worry, I've already called.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's like, oh, I just finished that CPR class. I should. Oh no, someone's already.
Yeah.
There's paramedics here.
Yeah,
they're probably better than me.
I passed somebody who was. Like yesterday, I was jogging from work to the train, as I'm wont to do, and there was somebody lying on the grass, and I stopped. There was a couple of other people looking and thinking, should we do something? And it was sort of trying to gauge for a moment, and I could see, okay, he's breathing, so that's good. And I was a little hesitant to try moving him or something like that, because it was the type of situation where, I don't know, he might just be sleeping there. And I looked at his bags and assessed, well, he obviously set them up and arranged them, and it wasn't like he fell over suddenly. Probably, but maybe, It's kind of hard to know what to do in that kind of situation. And I ended up continuing to jog on and thinking to myself, maybe I should have done something there. But luckily, I came across a police car, and I said, hey, could you go check on this guy just to be safe? And so he went to check on it. And there was part of me that was thinking, that those people are going to think that I just went and didn't bother to do anything about it. And so I'm not going to I'm going to seem like the bad guy who didn't lift a finger.
Which you did just go and do nothing about it.
I did go do nothing about it. And then coincidentally,
you had the opportunity,
it was the easiest thing in the world to do something about it.
And so now you want the credit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to observe the psychological thing underlying the situation in that thing. And I don't bring it up for it's just as a case study.
You just want everyone to know that you actually did this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm making the whole scenario up, so it doesn't really matter. It's all whole cloth.
No, I believe it happened. I believe it happened, and I believe that you did go to the police. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Well, I didn't go to the police. I passed the police, and it was convenient for me to just be like, hey, could you go do this job that I wasn't willing to do?
Yes. Yeah. Or
I did as little as possible.
Or to do.
I did as little
under
as
the
possible.
Circumstances. I have one more complaint to make, one more modest complaint, and I've saved it till the end because it's petty. So very often a translator will go through and translate all the German and then not translate anything else. And so very important things that you need to read in order to understand what's going on will be not just in French, but not just in Latin, not just in Greek, but sometimes in Latin, sometimes in Greek, sometimes in French. And so I have to stop reading a text that's already very difficult, lose the thread of the argument, Google Google Translate for these words. And this book was published in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So Google Translate didn't exist. It was a much more sophisticated process to look up even these simple phrases that were absolutely necessary to understand the text. And I think I know why. Because from this very reading we just did, Nietzsche will say that we are constrained by the meter of our very language. It's when he's talking about how important it is to work within a system. Poets are constrained by the meter of the very language that they use. And if they tried not to be constrained, they couldn't write anything because they have to work in a language. And so then the idea of translating from one language to another, it emphasizes how problematic that is, right? Because in trying to turn 5 words of Latin into something comprehensible in English, it's like 15 words of Latin, and of course the verbal stresses are going to be on different syllables, and the vowel sounds are going to be slightly different, and you're going to lose the poetry, the impact, the value of that phrase. Carpe diem does not mean seize the day. It means something more sophisticated than that. But seize the day is the best way to do it because it has that same sort of pithy light.
Yeah.
So you can't translate beautiful pithy phrases like this, neither God nor master. You can't translate that into English because you lose. But you've already translated every single word of German into English.
That's the problem we're already dealing with.
And you've left me beyond an ability to get any sense of the thing because you were committed to Nietzsche's values and didn't translate the one thing I need to unlock the meaning of the whole section. The whole section is a complaint about something one philosopher said, and if you only give it to me in Greek, it's a fucking disaster in the 1970s when I don't have a Greek-English dictionary at my fucking fingertips. And
I apologize because you're scolding me like I'm the one.
I'm pointing over your left shoulder. But I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it. And yes, I should grow up and just Google it. But also, what I should do is learn German so that I can actually read it. So your entire project of translation is a waste of breath anyway.
But then you'd still be lacking the Latin and the French.
What you're doing is stupid, and you should grow up.
Now you're looking me in the eye.
Or translate everything, because translating most of it and leaving a few words in some other language is completely disordered. And if you just want to make a note that Nietzsche wrote this not in German but in Greek, leave it in Greek and give me a translation in the footnote so I can still get the beauty of the line but also know what it means.
Yeah, that's making me wonder if, because I have some of the books that I have are these little lobe Latin translations. So they'll have the Latin on one page and then on the facing page they'll have the translation. And of course in ancient Roman writings you'd have, occasionally they'll throw a common Greek phrase in there. So there'll be some Greek thrown in. And I can't for the life of me remember if they have those translated. But that would be kind of the same kind of scenario where it's you have all the Latin translated into English, but you just leave the Greek.
At least it gives you a reference for where you are on the page, right?
Yeah.
You got the interlinear translation, but the English takes up a little bit more space. You can't immediately see, but maybe the few words of Greek give you a guide to how to turn from left to right. Did we do it? I think we did it. I feel good about this.
Yeah.
Darren, it's nice to be back. Happy September. I think we're posting this in September.
Let's say that we are.
Okay, so I hope that you have all had...
Wow, what a summer, am I right?
Holy smokes. I hope you have all had a merry feast for the first night of The Prophet and His Bride, which was about 4 weeks ago as we post this. It's I want to start acknowledging the Thelema calendar on here. So
that's a good idea.
And happy equinox, I guess.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to a great equinox upcoming and try to finish our sentences without stumbling. And thank you very much for joining me. I'm glad we got some Nietzsche in the can.
Love is the law, love under will.
Love is the law, love under will. Thanks for listening. Find Toronto Thelema online. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and help us grow. And join us again in the darkly splendid abodes.
Now you're looking me straight in the eye. I do blame you. I don't know why. It's not fair, but I do blame you.
Oh, I used to have a girlfriend who would do that. She's like, oh, I was at work and this woman started saying this thing, and I was like, you fucking piece of shit, getting right in my face, and I'm like, whoa. It's like you have to be the punching bag.
Oh my